The wrench slipped from grease-stained fingers, clattering against the concrete floor of Hangar 7 with a metallic echo that seemed to announce another failure. Staff Sergeant Maya Chen didn't bother looking up from beneath the F-16's engine compartment. She'd heard that particular sound of dismissal too many times before. The morning briefing had ended 20 minutes ago, and already the other technicians were filing past her workspace with barely concealed smirks. "Still playing with toys, Chun?" Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice carried that familiar edge of condescension as his boot stopped just within her peripheral vision. The flight suit he wore bore fresh creases, pressed perfection, while Maya's coveralls told a story of 3 sleepless nights spent elbow-deep in hydraulic systems and fuel lines. She could hear the shuffle of feet gathering behind him, an audience for whatever performance was about to unfold. Before we continue this incredible story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to follow our channel, and hit that like button if stories like this inspire you. And if you or anyone in your family has served in the military, we'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Your stories matter to us. The silence stretched like a taut wire until Maya finally emerged from beneath the aircraft, her short black hair escaping from beneath a standard-issue cap that had seen better days. Grease marked her left cheek like war paint, and her dark eyes held that peculiar stillness that comes from years of swallowing words that could end careers. Rodriguez towered over a compact frame, his chest puffed with the authority of someone who'd never had to prove himself with anything more demanding than flight simulator scores. "These birds don't fix themselves," Maya replied quietly, her voice barely audible above the distant hum of aircraft engines warming up on the tarmac. She reached for another wrench, the motion precise and economical, every gesture honed by countless hours of repetitive maintenance tasks that kept million-dollar aircraft in the sky while their pilots collected medals and glory. The laughter that followed was sharp and brief, like broken glass hitting pavement. Rodriguez exchanged glances with Sergeant Williams, whose own coveralls remained suspiciously clean despite being assigned to the same maintenance rotation. "Right. Well, try not to break anything important. Support staff." The emphasis on those last 2 words carried the weight of institutional dismissal, a reminder that in the rigid hierarchy of Nellis Air Force Base, Maya occupied the bottom rung of a very tall ladder. As their footsteps faded toward the flight line, Maya's fingers tightened around the wrench handle until her knuckles went white. Through the hangar's open doors, she could see the morning formation of F-16s taxiing toward the runway, their engines screaming promises of speed and freedom that she would never be permitted to experience. The irony wasn't lost on her. She knew these aircraft better than their own pilots, could diagnose engine problems by sound alone, could strip and rebuild a turbofan engine in half the time it took most technicians. Yet she remained invisible, a shadow moving between machines, keeping the warbirds flying while others claimed the sky. The mess hall buzzed with a familiar cadence of military gossip, voices rising and falling over the clatter of metal trays and the hiss of industrial coffee machines. Maya sat alone at a corner table, picking at her regulation lunch while conversation swirled around her like desert wind, acknowledged but not included, present but not seen. 2 tables over, a cluster of pilots leaned forward in animated discussion, their flight suits bearing the casual confidence of men who own the air above Nevada's endless expanse. "I'm telling you, it was unreal," Captain Morrison's voice carried across the room, his hand sketching aerial maneuvers in the air above his untouched sandwich. His wingmen from yesterday's training exercise nodded vigorously, still riding the adrenaline of what they'd witnessed. "This black F-22 comes out of nowhere, and just dismantles our entire formation. Textbook intercepts, perfect positioning, like the pilot could read our minds before we made our moves." The unofficial call sign had emerged months ago, whispered in ready rooms and maintenance bays with a mixture of awe and frustration. Nighthawk, ghost pilot, shadow in the sky. Someone flying sorties that weren't on any official schedule, using aircraft that weren't supposed to exist in their inventory, executing maneuvers that challenged everything they thought they knew about air combat. The brass claimed ignorance when pressed, their standard deflections about classified training protocols and need-to-know basis only fueling more speculation. Maya's fork paused halfway to her mouth as Lieutenant Chun, no relation, despite sharing a surname that had earned her exactly 0 camaraderie, leaned into the conversation with the eager intensity of someone desperate to belong. my buddy in air traffic control, says the transponder codes don't match anything in the system, like the plane doesn't officially exist. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow managed to carry further than normal speech. And get this, whoever's flying it has clearance codes that override everything. Tower tries to vector them into standard patterns, and they just disappear from radar. The laughter that followed held an edge of nervous energy, the kind that emerged when professional aviators encountered something beyond their understanding. Maya had heard variations of this conversation dozens of times, had watched grown men who could land on aircraft carriers in storm conditions struggle to explain what they'd witnessed in Nevada's restricted airspace. She kept her expression carefully neutral, mechanically chewing regulation meatloaf while her pulse quickened with each new detail. Whoever Nighthawk is, Morrison continued, draining his coffee in a single gulp, they're making us all look like we learned to fly at a county fair. Command's bringing in some hot shot from Top Gun next week. Probably wants to see if their golden boy can figure out what we're dealing with. The dismissal in his voice was automatic, the reflexive response of someone whose ego had been bruised by superior skill. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against linoleum with a sound like fingernails on metal. Just wait. When they finally catch up with our mystery pilot, it'll probably be some Air Force Academy pretty boy with connections and daddy's influence. As the pilots dispersed toward their afternoon briefings, Maya remained seated, her lunch growing cold while her mind raced through the implications of what she'd heard. The black F-22 they described sat in Hangar 12, officially listed as undergoing extended maintenance evaluation. She'd been assigned to its routine inspections for 3 months now, had memorized every rivet and wire, every system and subsystem. What the pilots didn't know, what couldn't know, was that the aircraft's flight hours were increasing without any corresponding entries in official logs. The Nevada night wrapped around Hangar 12 like black velvet, broken only by the amber glow of security lights that cast long shadows between the maintenance bays. Maya's footsteps echoed in the cavernous space as she made her way past rows of silent aircraft, each one a testament to American engineering and her own meticulous care. The official duty roster showed her shift ending at 1800 hours, but Maya had learned long ago that the real work began when the base settled into its nighttime rhythm. Her key card chirped against the reader with mechanical precision. Access granted to Staff Sergeant Chen, Maya L. Maintenance Specialist, Security Clearance. Secret. What the computer system didn't record was the additional authorization buried deep in classified databases, a digital ghost that had been waiting dormant for nearly 2 decades. She discovered by accident 3 months ago while running routine diagnostics on the base's maintenance scheduling system, a clearance level that shouldn't exist for someone of her rank, tied to a personnel file that contained nothing but redacted black bars and her father's old serial number. The F-22 Raptor sat in its designated bay like a sleeping predator, its angular stealth geometry drinking in the hangar's artificial light, without reflection. Most technicians found the aircraft intimidating, its alien contours and classified systems creating a psychological barrier that kept casual observers at a respectful distance. But Maya approached it with the familiarity of someone returning home, her hands already reaching for the pre-flight inspection checklist she'd memorized years before she'd ever been assigned to touch this particular machine. Colonel James Chun, her father, had flown the first operational F-22 missions over Syria in 2014. She'd been 12 then, old enough to understand why he couldn't talk about his work, young enough to believe that heroes came home from every war. The photograph tucked inside her maintenance manual showed him standing beside an aircraft identical to this one, his helmet tucked under one arm, that same slight smile she remembered from Saturday morning pancake breakfast and bedtime stories about the physics of flight. The machine remembers, he'd told her during one of their final conversations, his voice already weakened by the cancer that would claim him before her 16th birthday. Every bolt, every wire, every system, they all have memory. Treat them with respect, and they'll keep you alive when nothing else will. His hands had been steady then, guiding hers through the basic maintenance procedures on their garage workshop's makeshift flight simulator, teaching her the sacred knowledge passed down through generations of military aviators. The pre-flight sequence flowed through her fingers like muscle memory inherited through DNA. Fuel systems, check. Hydraulic pressure, nominal. Avionics initialization, complete. Each step brought the aircraft closer to life, its systems humming with barely contained power that vibrated to the hangar floor and into her bones. She performed this ritual dozens of times now, each one a communion with her father's legacy and a preparation for missions that officially didn't exist. The helmet that emerged from the maintenance locker bore no squadron markings, no call signs, no identification beyond the faded manufacturer's tag. Inside, tucked behind a padding where only she would see it, was a small photograph, the same one from her manual, but this copy showed what the official version had cropped out. Standing beside Colonel Chun was a woman in dress blues, captain's bars gleaming on her shoulders, her face bearing the same determined expression that Maya saw in her own mirror each morning. Her mother, the pilot who died in a classified accident when Maya was too young to remember anything but the sound of her voice singing lullabies about flying through clouds. Commander Jake Apollo. Matthew stepped off the transport aircraft at 0600 hours with the kind of swagger that came from never having lost an aerial engagement. His dress whites were immaculate despite the cross-country flight, his chest adorned with ribbons that told the story of a career built on perfect scores and flawless execution. Top Gun graduate, Navy Cross recipient, the kind of pilot whose reputation preceded him into every ready room and briefing hall in the military aviation community. Maya watched from the maintenance bay as a convoy of staff cars rolled across the tarmac to collect the visiting dignitary. Even from a distance, she could see the easy confidence in his movements, the way junior officers straightened their postures when he passed, the automatic deference that accompanied genuine skill wrapped in institutional authority. Rodriguez and his crew had been preparing for this moment all week, polishing their flight records and rehearsing explanations that might salvage their bruised egos. "So that's the hot shot they brought in to solve our Nighthawk problem," Sergeant Williams muttered, appearing at Maya's shoulder with the morning's maintenance schedule clutched in oil-stained fingers. His tone carried that peculiar mixture of resentment and anticipation that emerged whenever outside expertise was imported to address local failures. $20, says pretty boy gets schooled just like the rest of us. The morning briefing drew every available pilot into the base's primary conference room, their voices creating a low buzz of speculation that Maya could hear through the ventilation system as she worked on routine maintenance 2 floors below. Through fragment of conversation and overheard radio chatter, she pieced together the official narrative. Commander Matthews would be conducting enhanced training exercises over the next 72 hours, designed to identify and engage with the unidentified aircraft that had been disrupting standard training protocols. What they didn't know, what the classified mission parameters buried in her father's old files had taught her, was that Nighthawk's appearances weren't random. Each sortie corresponded to specific threats identified by satellite intelligence and NSA intercepts, enemy aircraft probing America's western defensive perimeter while official channels remained deliberately ignorant. The mysterious pilot wasn't disrupting training exercises. They were conducting actual combat air patrols disguised as routine flights. By 1400 hours, Matthews had completed his first intercept attempt. Maya listened to the radio traffic from her position beneath the maintenance platform, her wrench moving in steady rhythm while the pilots' voices painted a picture of professional humiliation across the restricted frequencies. Negative contact, negative contact. Target has vanished from all sensors. The strain in Matthews' voice was barely perceptible, but Maya had spent years learning to read the subtle indicators of pilot stress and fatigue. The debriefing that followed lasted 3 hours, voices raised in animated discussion that carried to the hangar walls like distant thunder. When the pilots finally emerged, their faces bore the same confused frustration that had become standard operating procedure whenever anyone attempted to engage the ghost in the black F-22. Matthews himself looked like a man who just discovered that everything he thought he knew about air combat might be fundamentally wrong. That evening, Maya made her way to Hangar 12 as darkness settled over the Nevada desert like a familiar blanket. The F-22 waited in its bay, patient and deadly, its systems already warm from her afternoon preparations. As she ran to the pre-flight checklist, her father's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes the best way to protect people is to remain invisible. Let them think you're weak. Let them underestimate your capabilities. and then be exactly who you need to be when it matters most. The helmet slid over her head with practiced ease, its heads-up display painting the world in shades of tactical information and targeting data. In 6 hours, Chinese reconnaissance aircraft would penetrate American airspace over the Pacific, their electronic warfare suites probing for weaknesses in radar coverage while diplomatic channels maintained plausible deniability. Commander Matthews and his escorts would be asleep in their quarters, dreaming of victories that would never appear in official records, while Nighthawk rose into the desert sky to do the work that kept wars from starting. The alarm shrieked through Nellis Air Force Base at exactly 0347 hours, its piercing wail cutting through the pre-dawn stillness like a blade through silk. Maya jerked awake in her barracks bunk, muscle memory pulling her upright before her conscious mind processed the significance of the three-tone alert pattern. Real-world emergency. Immediate scramble. All available aircraft. Through the thin walls, she could hear the thunder of boots hitting floor as pilots and ground crew responded to the call that transformed routine training exercises into actual combat operations. Voices shouted coordinates and target designations, while engines roared to life across the flight line. The controlled chaos of a military installation shifting from peacetime operations to war footing in less than 4 minutes. The briefing room buzzed with electric tension as personnel flooded in wearing whatever combination of flight suits and civilian clothes they'd managed to grab in their rush to respond. Major Harrison, the wing commander, stood at the front with a face carved from granite and eyes that had seen too many emergencies to waste time on comforting platitudes. Behind him, the main display screen showed a tactical map of the Pacific Northwest, dotted with red triangles that represented confirmed hostile aircraft penetrating American airspace. Gentlemen, this is not a drill. Harrison's voice cut to the murmur conversation like a cleaver through bone. At 0330 hours, NORAD detected multiple bogies crossing into restricted airspace over Washington state. Initial assessment suggests Chinese J-20 stealth fighters conducting reconnaissance of our nuclear facilities at Hanford. Rules of engagement are weapons-free. These are not training targets. Maya stood against the back wall, still wearing her maintenance coveralls, officially present only because all personnel had been ordered to report for emergency briefing. Around her, pilots checked their gear and reviewed intercept procedures while she memorized flight paths and tactical scenarios that would never appear on her duty roster. The irony burned in her chest. She knew more about engaging J-20s than anyone in the room, had studied their radar signatures and flight characteristics through classified intelligence reports that her security clearance should never have accessed. Commander Matthews stepped forward, his earlier confidence replaced by the focused intensity of someone finally facing the real enemy instead of mysterious training anomalies. Sir, recommend we launch a full intercept package. F-22s from the 94th Fighter Squadron, backed by F-16s from the... Negative. Harrison's interruption carried the weight of orders from far above his pay grade. Our F-22s are down for scheduled maintenance. We've got 6 F-16s flight ready, but against stealth fighters. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the room understood the mathematics of modern air combat. 4th-generation fighters against 5th-generation stealth aircraft was barely a step above suicide. The silence that followed stretched like a taut wire, filled with the unspoken acknowledgement that American air superiority, the foundation of their tactical doctrine since World War II, had just evaporated in a few sentences. Maya felt her pulse quicken as she realized the truth hidden beneath the official briefing. The only F-22 currently flight-ready on the entire base sat in Hangar 12, officially listed as undergoing extended maintenance evaluation. What about Nighthawk? The question came from Lieutenant Rodriguez, his earlier arrogance replaced by desperate hope. If our mystery pilot is half as good as everyone claims. Harrison's expression darkened. Nighthawk is a ghost story, Lieutenant. Pilot folklore. We don't have time for fairy tales when enemy aircraft are violating American sovereignty. But Maya caught the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, the look of a commander who would grasp at any straw to avoid sending his pilots into an engagement they couldn't win. As the briefing dissolved into tactical planning and last-minute preparations, Maya slipped out of the room and into the pre-dawn darkness. Her feet carried her toward Hangar 12 with the certainty of someone following a path carved by destiny rather than choice. Behind her, the base erupted into controlled frenzy as ground crews prepared aircraft for combat, and pilots donned gear that might be their shrouds. The F-22 waited in its bay like a sleeping dragon, its systems already warm from her midnight maintenance routine. This time, the pre-flight checks carried the weight of actual combat, each switch engaged representing the difference between victory and catastrophe. As she strapped herself into the cockpit, Maya whispered a prayer her father had taught her, not to God, but to machine itself, asking for the partnership that would be required to bring both of them home alive. The F-22 Raptor sliced through the Washington state dawn like a shadow given wings, its stealth profile invisible to enemy radar, as it climbed toward the coordinates where American sovereignty hung in the balance. 40,000 feet below, 6 F-16s struggled northward in formation, their pilots knowing they were flying into an engagement where courage would have to substitute for technological advantage. Maya's heads-up display painted the tactical picture in crisp detail, for Chinese J-20 stealth fighters maintaining loose formation as they conducted what intelligence analysts would later classify as aggressive reconnaissance of the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. Their electronic warfare suites were active, mapping radar installations and communication frequencies with a methodical precision that preceded actual military operations. This wasn't a training exercise or diplomatic posturing. It was preparation for war. Razor flight. This is Overlord. The AWACS controller's voice crackled through the encrypted frequency, tight with professional tension. Bogies bearing 270. Angels 4-5. Maintaining course toward primary objective. You're cleared to engage weapons free. Repeat weapons free. Rodriguez's voice responded from the lead F-16, carrying none of his usual arrogance. Combat had a way of stripping away everything except competence and fear. Copy Overlord, Razor flight engaging. Maya could hear the strain in his transmission, the knowledge that he was leading 5 other pilots into an aerial meat grinder where American pilots would pay the price for politicians' failure to maintain military superiority. The engagement began badly and deteriorated from there. The J-20s used their stealth advantage to position themselves perfectly, striking from angles that the F-16's radar couldn't track until missile lock warnings screamed through their cockpits. Within 30 seconds, 2 American aircraft were already limping toward emergency landing fields, their pilots nursing damaged systems and wounded pride. Maya watched the slaughter unfold through her tactical display, her father's voice echoing in her memory. Sometimes being invisible means watching good people die while you wait for the perfect moment. But that moment always comes, and when it does, you have to be ready to become exactly who you need to be. The perfect moment announced itself when Rodriguez's F-16 took a missile hit that sent it spinning toward the ground in a trail of smoke and burning hydraulic fluid. His ejection seat fired at 8,000 feet, the white parachute blossoming like a flower against the dark forest below, while his wingman screamed coordinates the search and rescue teams who might arrive too late to matter. Overlord, this is Nighthawk. Maya's voice cut across the tactical frequency with the calm authority of someone who had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Request immediate clearance to engage hostile aircraft. Grid coordinates follow. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 heartbeats, long enough for every pilot in the air and every control on the ground to process the impossible. The ghost pilot was real, was here, was requesting permission to enter an engagement that had already claimed half the American strike force. Nighthawk, this is Overlord. Authenticate your authority to engage. Maya's fingers found the encrypted transponder her father had installed in the aircraft's avionics bay, the device that would broadcast authorization codes buried so deep in classified databases that even she didn't fully understand their origin. Authentication code Whiskey 77 Alpha November. Colonel James Chun, authorization posthumous. The response came immediately, as if the AWACS crew had been waiting 20 years for those exact words. Nighthawk, you are cleared to engage. All other aircraft, clear the area immediately. Nighthawk has operational command. Maya rolled the F-22 into an attack profile that would have been impossible in any other aircraft, her targeting systems painting solutions against enemy fighters that thought themselves invisible. The J-20s had made one critical error. They'd forgotten that stealth worked both ways, and that somewhere in the morning sky, death was approaching on silent wings. What followed would be studied in Air Force academies for the next 50 years, dissected frame by frame from gun camera footage that captured 11 minutes of aerial combat that redefined everything military strategists thought they knew about air superiority. Maya's F-22 moved through 3 dimensions like liquid mercury, exploiting gaps in enemy formation that existed for microseconds before vanishing into geometry that shouldn't have been possible. The first J-20 died without knowing it was under attack. Maya's AIM-120 AMRAAM struck from a firing position that the Chinese pilot's radar insisted was empty sky, the missile's high-explosive warhead, converting $20 million of stealth technology into falling debris over the Cascade Mountains. The remaining 3 enemy aircraft immediately broke formation, their pilots suddenly aware that the hunter had become the hunted. "Nighthawk has splashed one," Maya reported, her voice carrying the same calm professionalism she used for routine maintenance reports. Below, the surviving F-16s climbed back toward the engagement zone, their pilots drawn by the impossible spectacle unfolding above them. Rodriguez's wingman keyed his microphone with awe that bordered on religious experience. How the hell is she doing that? The second engagement lasted 43 seconds. Maya used the F-22's thrust vectoring to execute a knife-edge turn that bled energy in ways that should have stalled the aircraft, instead positioning her directly behind AJ-20, whose pilot was still searching empty radar screens for his invisible enemy. The 20mm cannon burst lasted 2 seconds, 6 depleted uranium rounds finding their target with surgical precision that turned the enemy fighter into an expanding cloud of metal fragments and aviation fuel. By the time she engaged the third J-20, the Chinese pilots had abandoned their reconnaissance mission in favor of pure survival. Maya found herself in a vertical climb that pulled 8 GS, her vision tunneling at the edges while the F-22's engines screamed against gravity and physics. The enemy pilot was good, academy-trained, combat-experienced, flying aircraft that represented his nation's most advanced military technology. It wasn't enough. The engagement ended with a head-on pass at a combined closure rate of nearly Mach 3, both aircraft firing simultaneously in a moment that lasted forever and ended instantly. Maya's AIM-9X Sidewinder found its target while the enemy's missile passed harmlessly through the space where her F-22 should have been, confused by stealth characteristics that made the Raptor invisible to infrared seekers at anything beyond point-blank range. The fourth J-20 broke off engagement and fled toward international waters at maximum afterburner, its pilot undoubtedly composing a report that his superiors would find difficult to believe. Maya let him go. The message had been delivered with mathematical precision. American airspace remained inviolate, defended by capabilities that existed outside official channels and beyond conventional understanding. "Overlord, this is Nighthawk," Maya transmitted as she turned the F-22 back toward Nevada. "Threat neutralized. 3 enemy aircraft destroyed, 1 retreating. Search and rescue coordinates for Razor 2 transmitted on guard frequency." The AWACS controller's response carried a tremor that spoke of witnessing something beyond his training to comprehend. "Copy, Nighthawk. Outstanding work. Command requests your immediate return to base for debriefing." Maya smiled inside her helmet, knowing that the debriefing would be unlike anything in military protocol. Questions would be asked that had no comfortable answers, and authority figures would demand explanations for capabilities that shouldn't exist. But for the first time in 3 years, she would land her aircraft with the knowledge that her invisible war had become visible, and that the price of revelation would be worth the cost. The F-22 descended through morning clouds toward Nellis Air Force Base, where 24 aircraft waited on the tarmac in formation, every pilot, crew chief, and ground technician on the base standing at attention beside their machines. Word spread through military channels with the speed of wildfire. Nighthawk was coming home, and the ghost was about to become flesh. The black F-22 Raptor touched down on runway 03, with a whisper-saw precision that marked a pilot who treated aircraft like extensions of their own nervous system. Emergency vehicles flanked the taxiway, not because of mechanical problems, but because protocol demanded their presence when legends materialized into reality. The entire base held its collective breath as the stealth fighter rolled toward the primary tarmac, where General Patricia Morrison waited beside a formation that included every ranking officer within 50 miles. Maya felt the weight of destiny settling around her shoulders as she completed the shutdown sequence. Each switch and gauge returning to neutral positions that marked the end of one life and the beginning of another. Through the cockpit glass, she could see faces press against hangar windows, pilots and ground crew straining for the first glimpse of the person who had just redefined American air power in 11 minutes of impossible flying. The canopy hissed open with hydraulic precision, releasing the pressurized atmosphere that had been her world for the past 3 hours. Maya Chen, Staff Sergeant, Maintenance Specialist, Invisible Support Personnel, began the process of becoming someone else entirely. The helmet came off first, releasing black hair that had been compressed beneath padding designed for someone else's head. Then the oxygen mask, revealing features that half the base had seen daily for 3 years without truly seeing at all. The silence that followed was absolute. 200 military personnel stood frozen in perfect formation while their understanding of reality underwent fundamental revision. Rodriguez, his flight suit still bearing scorch marks from his ejection sequence, stared with the expression of someone watching resurrection performed in broad daylight. Commander Matthews stood beside General Morrison, his earlier confidence replaced by something approaching reverence. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered from the back of the formation. Probably Sergeant Williams, whose clean coveralls suddenly seemed like costume jewelry compared to Maya's grease-stained authenticity. "It's the mechanic." Maya climbed down from the cockpit with the same deliberate precision she brought to aircraft maintenance, her boots hitting the tarmac with clicks that echoed across the silent base like gunshots. She carried her helmet under one arm, the visor reflecting morning sunlight that painted everything in shades of gold and possibility. The walk toward General Morrison lasted forever and ended too quickly, each step carrying her further from the invisible world she inhabited and closer to whatever came after revelation. General Morrison stepped forward, her own flight suit bearing ribbons that told stories of combat commands and administrative excellence. But her eyes held the recognition that one warrior gives another, the acknowledgement that ranks and regulations sometimes bow before raw competence and inherited duty. "Staff Sergeant Chun," she said, her voice carrying across the tarmac with parade ground clarity. "I believe we need to discuss your additional qualifications." "Yes, ma'am," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. Behind the general, she could see pilots who had mocked her mechanical expertise now struggling to reconcile their prejudices with the evidence of her capabilities. Rodriguez looked like he wanted to disappear into the tarmac itself, while Matthews wore the expression of someone recalculating every assumption he'd ever made about air combat superiority. The debriefing that followed would last 6 hours and involve phone calls to Washington that reached the highest levels of military command. But standing on the flight line in the Nevada morning, with her father's F-22 cooling behind her and her mother's courage finally acknowledged, Maya Chen allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The invisible war was over. The real recognition of her capabilities, her sacrifice, her family's legacy was just beginning. 3 weeks later, the promotion ceremony took place in the same hangar where Rodriguez had once dismissed her as support staff. Captain Maya Chen received her pilot's wings from General Morrison herself, while a formation of F-22s performed a flyover that spelled Nighthawk in contrails against the desert sky. In the front row, Rodriguez sat beside Matthews, both men wearing expressions of professional respect that had been earned in blood and validated in combat. The mechanic who had been invisible for 3 years had finally become exactly who she had always been, and the sky would never be the same.